Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Sundine's webinar entitled Digital Storytelling, How to Bring Your Hotel Website to Life. Before we get started, please note today's session is being recorded and you will receive a copy of the session by email shortly afterwards. Let's dive in with an introduction to our speakers. First, we have Eric Reese, who is the Global Creative Director here at Sundine. Eric leads the creative efforts for Sundine's entire client portfolio. He's responsible for ensuring the highest standard of excellence for all creative work across the company's digital skill set. Additionally, Eric provides design and strategic guidance for website projects to both internal and external stakeholders. Before joining Sundine, Eric was the creative director for Next Guest Innovations Labs, and he was also the creative director for Sabre Hospitality Solutions for 8 years. Eric has extensive experience leading creative teams working on a variety of national and international hotel brands, including Marriott, Loews, Mandarin Oriental, Fontainebleau, Four Seasons, and Waldorf Astoria. And joining Eric, we have Rick Posey, the Senior Director of Reporting and Analytics for Sundine's e-commerce products. With a diverse background spanning roles at ICIMS, Sabre Hospitality Solutions, and Preferred Hotels and Resorts, Rick has honed a versatile skill set encompassing user interface design, web analytics, digital strategy, e-commerce, and product management. This blend of industry knowledge from both the hotel and tech sides allows Rick to bring a unique perspective to his role, offering valuable insights into the ever-evolving landscape of the digital business and consumer behavior. This duo is the ultimate bundle where creativity meets analytics. We expect this to be an engaging and educational discussion, so let's get started.
Great, thanks, Laura. I hope you all can hear me well, and welcome to this conversation. One of the things that we wanted to do here, instead of a traditional webinar where we would share a PowerPoint presentation, we wanted to make this a little bit more conversational. So I was fortunate enough to convince Rick to join me for this call because I honestly, every time I speak with Rick, I learn something new, and it's really great to have him. And the other thing that I think is really important is how in the old days, a lot of website projects, which is really where I focus my attention, website projects are just living in one lane, and building a beautiful website that we think is going to work for our customers and drive conversions, but never really connecting the dots with all the other parts and pieces that are truly important for a holistic and healthy website that is going to evolve over time. And that's why I thought Rick is the perfect person to jump in and help connect those dots between the creative and more of the analytical and the scientific side of the house. But before we get into some of the topics that we want to talk about here, I just wanted to sort of set the stage here. Digital storytelling is not necessarily a new concept. It goes back a long ways. You scratch out the word digital, storytelling in the advertising days was all about brand. And I think it's no secret that businesses that wanted to connect with their users, their customers, understood the importance of a brand story, making a visceral connection between them and their products and a customer. It helps with the reacquisition and the engagement and the loyalty of those customers for the term of, for the long term going into the future. And of course, everybody talks about Apple. Apple's super important. They have a great brand. Everybody understands the brand and they have a loyal customer base. Well, it doesn't happen overnight. And that evolves over time, and they've tweaked their story. They've grown their story. And back in the days when I was working in the advertising world, I really learned the value of a brand story. But the sad part of that, I guess, for me as a creative, was we were sort of limited to things like TV, radio, print, and all of the other traditional advertising channels. But now with digital, you think about how you can you can take that story and really understand much clearer how your story is resonating with your audience in real time. And you can be a little bit more proactive about how you may need to adjust your story, tweak it, improve it, or see what parts of your story aren't really working. And that's kind of where Rick jumps into this conversation and really makes it interesting for us creatives, is like, hey, I think I'm doing something that looks really great and our users are going to like, but is it really working? Let's test it. And that's a really important piece of the puzzle. Is there anything you wanted to add to that, Rick, before we move in?
Well, I certainly appreciate the kind words, Eric, and thanks everyone for joining. But I think you're right. I think the way we wanted to share this story of storytelling is that there's two sides to this coin, right? There's the presentation, there's the marvel of how you represent your brand in a digital landscape, right? And I think that's where Eric and his team really shine. A great deal. You heard a lot of the clients that he's worked with that Laura shared, and it's pretty remarkable, right? But behind the scenes, there's also a lot of work that goes on backstage, right? I mean, there's to say nothing of the development, the amount of development that goes into it, all the investment that happens to bring something to life. You have to back it up, right? You have to prove its worth, and that comes from the data, right? So the other side of the coin is paying attention to what the numbers are telling you. If I will, but I think that's a great setup, and thank you for that, Eric. But yeah, we're excited to talk through like how these two worlds kind of collide, and then form this more cyclical maturation cycle of a website.
Right, cool. And I think the goal for this conversation is to really walk through the how of our approach to digital storytelling in the hospitality space. It's like, where do you start? What do you need to get started? How do you organize your brand in a way that's going to connect with those different audiences? And then, how we in turn take that story and turn it into something that will grow and evolve over time, as I said before. So let's jump in. I'm going to slide my deck over here just a little bit, and we'll focus on this first topic here of design methodology. And we've got basically, there's two buckets, if you will, of concepting going on here. Before we start a project, Rick, if you want to talk a little bit about the analysis, and this is really happy path, isn't it, to how a project gets rolling?
That's fair. Yeah, there are some assumptions we make in here, right? So assuming we have access to the right stuff when we're working with a new or prospective customer, I think that's important to state. But yeah, I mean, we start with understanding, not just who you are or what your brand represents, but what your goals are. Like, what are you trying to achieve out of your website, your digital presence, be it on an app, social media, or wherever, right? Like, what are your goals? We ask those questions, and then we ask to look at the data, right? We want to make sure that the measurements and the performance that we're seeing aligns with those goals. And if not, that's a key indicator, for Eric and his team to say like, okay, well, if you want to do, X, Y, and Z on your site, the data is saying something different. So let's try this, right? And so we've broken it down into these categories of analysis, right? So we start with site performance, and like any good recipe, we have to focus on the ingredients, right? So these are some of those ingredients that get creative where we think it needs to be to start with a healthy website. So, using Google Analytics, we start with site performance and understanding, who's coming to your site, what are they doing? Are they converting in the places you want to convert, right? We start looking at, the conversion funnel itself, right? Are there roadblocks that we're putting up in there? Are there pages that people are exiting on? So we look for these kind of signals in your data. And I'm sure a great number of people are doing that today, which is great. I think there's more data democratization that needs to happen across the spectrum anyway, right? But this is where we start. We look at, are there any stories in the data that we can learn from that are preventing a user from converting? Or are there any pages that people are exiting on right away that we need to pay attention to? Anything that kind of blocks the brand from being the brand. We take a look at, and if it's available, we take a look at some more behavioral analytics, such as using Hotjar for click maps and heat maps. We want to understand, are people clicking on the right things on the site? Some examples of where you might not see that happening are, if you have a booking console on your site, are people engaging with it in a meaningful way? Is it blocked by your navigation, or is it blocking your navigation? Where did you put your cookie banner? We start to look at how people interact. And then that starts to kind of feed Eric's design methodology. I give him the information after doing this analysis, and kind of help guide the vision that he's laid out. And to his credit, I think he probably already has the answer in his head too. But we also tend to look at user feedback, right? We'll take some polls probably internally and understand hey, how do you feel about this site? Knowing what you know about this brand, would you book a hotel here? We take a look at the audiences. How are they behaving? How are they converting? Are they doing it differently depending on where they're coming from? Which leads us to channel performance, right? So is your organic traffic behaving differently than your direct traffic? Is there a way to optimize for both in a new design? So there's a lot of ingredients here that we try to put together to really inform the design output, right? And you see those keywords at the bottom, right? Those are what these things inform. So analysis informs creative, analysis informs the site navigation and architecture, and ultimately informs the performance, right? Which leads us to Eric's side of the coin, where once he has that data, he starts breaking it down with his team and going through their design questionnaire and content hierarchy.
Yeah, and isn't it interesting though, Rick, because a lot of this never ends, right? This initial analysis, as design trends and UX trends change and evolve over time. If you just think about things like two of the most obvious ones that we look at are navigation. Is it a hamburger navigation versus a horizontal navigation, or God forbid, a vertical navigation? Please don't ever do that. Versus, yeah, as you said, the open booking console versus the closed booking console. And, you'd say 10 years ago, the open booking console, for instance, was a no-brainer. That's what we would recommend. This is best practices. But, as time goes by, users get smarter. They understand how to, where that book now button is typically always placed in the upper right-hand corner. And things like that. It's really great for designers to understand from a scientific perspective, like, this is where it's working, this is where it's not working, and that informs the best practices, methodologies that we start to put into our designs. So for instance, if Rick was to come to me and say, hey Eric, we've been looking across our whole collection of client sites, and we see that the open booking console is converting, and I'll throw a number out there, 5% higher than a closed booking console. And here's the, on average, you can kind of break it down to what the difference in revenue is earned out of that open booking console versus a closed booking console. That's really important information for us, because then we can when we start those conversations with our customers, we can talk about that. And they, for instance, a customer say, well, we really like this website over here, and there's a closed booking console, and we don't want the big booking console open here. And it gives us creatives the information and the backing to say, I understand what you're trying to do there, but we really want you to, here's why we think you should do an open booking console, as an example. And here's what the return on investment is going to be, or the difference between a closed versus an open. These little nuances, which aren't really very apparent, in a lot of sites that you look at, people just take a step back and go, wow, that's pretty, but is it working? And that's why I love to call Rick up and pick his brain and get a better understanding of what's going on there, what your measurements are. And then we can just take that information and run with it, and provide our customers with the best recommendations, with the best design solutions for them going forward. And this kind of fits into, that digital story that you're trying to tell. Everybody has a different story, so every approach is a little bit different, but if you have the basic foundation and the building blocks, if you will, you're headed in the right direction. So kind of taking that pollination of Rick's team and his scientific methodology there and applying it to the design stuff. The way we would start a new project with a customer is with this design questionnaire. It's something we're very proud of. We've spent, gosh, Rick, we've worked together for what, 15 years, I think?
Something like that, yeah.
A long time. We've seen it all, and we've been through this many times with many customers. So we have a really good idea of what the creative goals are for any particular hotel website. So we, all of that said, we created this design questionnaire, which is a really great tool for us creatives to understand the brand, the story, the tone of voice that the story is trying to use, and all of the different targets that any website project might be focused on. So, for example, you've got targets. Obviously, typically it's booking rooms, heads and beds, but there also might be targets about capturing users or booking dining, F&B, or spa. Figuring out and understanding the cadence of those different targets help to shape the story that you're trying to tell to your audience. What comes first? What comes second? What's the value of each of those different propositions in the digital space? And so that we start to understand that direction here in this design questionnaire, learning about you and the customers as much as we possibly can, digesting that information, and then starts to inform the direction of the creative going forward. And frankly, it helps us collaborate better with our clients as well, to say, hey, I see what you made this comment here, and I think I know what you're going for, but maybe try it this way, because I think that's going to get you where you need to go. This is where our expertise comes in. We've been doing this for a very long time. Like I said, we've seen almost everything, and we can apply our experience and knowledge to that conversation for each of those things. And in terms of kind of getting to this next bucket here of the content hierarchy, if we take all of that information from the design questionnaire and we have a nice, honest conversation with our clients about what their goals are for their website, we've got the data to back up the decisions that we're going to make and the recommendations that we're going to make. We can start to build out this content hierarchy. And in one of the ways I used to talk about this with our clients, our customers, would be, I would say, take the scenario. Let's pretend that you are a hotel manager, property manager, and you've invited somebody into your front door. You meet them in the lobby. You want to sell them on staying at your property. How do you talk about your property? What do you talk about first? What's second? What's third? What's most important? How do you stack up your different value propositions in a way that tells your story and makes your property feel unique, different, and ultimately resonates with that customer? How are they going to feel when they walk through the lobby? Do they feel important, or is it a little bit more relaxed? All of those little nuances are really important, and is part of the brand story that comes to us when we start a project. But then we take that information, boil it down, digest it, and then start to figure out how we sort that in a way that's going to resonate and then also cohesively make sense, right? You can't just throw everything at the audience. This is important. That's important, right, Rick? Look at this. Look at that. And I sometimes say to Rick, is like, when everything is important, nothing is important. So we have to build out a hierarchy, and I think it's a really important piece of the puzzle. No?
Yeah, no, hearing you talk about it that way, Eric, I equate it a little bit to songwriting in a sense where, we start with some of the mechanics of the song and start to understand the shape of it and the feel of it. And, the line that's on the screen here, it's not meant to be a fence, right? It's not like I would do the analysis and give it to Eric. No, there's a lot of back and forth that happens in here, right? So it's like we lock ourselves away in a studio and work on the progression of what we're trying to craft here, right? So there's a lot of good collaboration that happens between the teams, and as Eric said, over the years, I think we've refined that craft, that songwriting a little bit here, really well. But yeah, like we try to get it to a point where it sings your song. It represents your brand, the vision, the story, your intended audiences, capturing maybe new ones, right? And I think that's where we land on the ultimate recommendation. But that's also not the end of it, too, right, Eric?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is really just the beginning of this whole adventure here, right? So, but it gives us a good place to start. And we all know that, we get a website up there, and it's now as your audience starts to go to and visit it, we can collect even more data, understand even more about your users, what they're interested in, where they're clicking, and all of that. And I think this is a good segue into our next section about building a healthy website. And from that previous step there, we've learned as much as we can about the brand and the brand voice and the digital storyline that we want to tell. Right. This is the song that we've created. And now we have this beautiful thing. There's your healthy website. We start to, we've got all our pages, everything's working, the links are working. The developers have done a fantastic job of adding the depth and the animations to the site, and it's really starting to sing. And this is where it's almost, it's a baby at this point, isn't it? I mean, that's maybe one way you can look at it, right? And we can see, how are the conversions going? Are all of those best practices, the methodologies, and the design choices that we've made, how are they resonating? Are they working? Are people noticing the buttons that they should be noticing? Are we giving them, the users, the choices that they want when they get to each section of a page? One of the things that we talk about a lot on the design team is choice, this or that. I get to each section of a website, you introduce a piece of information, some content, some part of your story that you're trying to tell. Maybe you're talking about the lobby and how it's a place where groups come together, and where do you start? What do you want me to do as a user? What do you want me to do from that spot? Is there something actionable I can do, or is there something more I can learn from that, or just move on, this or that? So we provide options through each step of that website experience to help us improve that engagement, drive traffic into the interior pages, and then ultimately convert, right? And then, we're also starting to see how the channel performances are working from the different feeds, right? Social media as an example, right, Rick? So what would be another good example of channel performance that you guys would start looking at?
Certainly, like organic search, right? Like how that's performing on your site, because there are a lot of components that go into a healthy website beyond, what we're representing today. Like you mentioned development. Obviously, that's one of the biggest indicators of a healthy website, right? And then there's the SEO team that's continually optimizing with your content team, right? So there's a lot of chefs trying to deliver this initial website, right? This healthy website. You called it a baby. I think that's right. Or a garden, right? Something you nurture and tend to over time. You have to make sure like you've planted it the right way. So we do look at the channel performance. We look at how we're driving traffic to the site, what they're doing on the site. As Eric was saying, like, did we carve out the right paths here, right? And like we arrived at a point, right, where there's alignment on what healthy means for the initial launch, and we go after that. We get it out the door. But I think, historically, in decades past, the old way of looking at a site was you build it, you launch it, and then you hope it goes like a train, right? It's staying on the tracks. But I think these days, right, there's more data, there's more to the story, there's more nurturing that needs to happen, right? Because the world is constantly changing, right? The digital, landscape of Google and everyone else is always shifting, and the rules seem like they're always changing, right? So we need to evolve with that, right? So it kind of keeps you on your toes in a fun way. And then getting to interact and help others understand, like, hey, we need to make some changes here. Like, we launched this thing and it's fine. It may be going well. There may be some areas of improvement, but we have to pay attention to it. And I think that's probably, the next part of the story, right? Is like what happens after you arrive at a healthy website.
Yeah. It's really funny when you say you get to this in the old days, build that website, and then you just almost walk away from it and go, I'm so exhausted from all the time and energy you put into this project, and you're like, I need a break from it. But then eventually, a while later, you get back in. I think it is also interesting when this happens on occasion, working with customers where in my past, we build a great website, then they leave it alone. They don't tend that garden. They don't take care of that baby, if we're going to mix analogies, if you will. But it's a year, it's 2 years down the road, and the site looks the same. And that story that they initially talked about wanting to tell is gone, because life is, the world has moved on, and they got to keep up with it. It's really important that, when you get to I've launched my website, I have now what I hope is a healthy website. That's, you've only made the first churn in a long lap around the track, because so much more is required to make sure that this thing is going to resonate. I keep using that word over and over. I'm going to punch myself again if I say it. But connecting with your audiences, it is an ongoing process. There is no end to it, right? So I guess that kind of moves us into the next phase of this conversation, doesn't it, Rick? Where we talk about the back of house performance methodology. Creative has been up there. Rick and his team jump in, and now they're spending a lot of their time looking at the data, right? What's working, what's not working, where are the weak spots? Yeah.
That's right. That's right. And that ongoing analysis, we do spend quite a bit of time, not just trying to understand it on behalf of our customers, but for ourselves too, right? Because it also lends the insights to improving how we work in service of our customers, right? So we do spend a lot of time looking at site performance. Did we accomplish the things that we intended to do with this initial launch? And sometimes it's not just a yes or no answer, right? You have to break that down, right? So we kind of go back through that initial analysis, some of the same steps as before, taking a look at, now that we've launched a healthy site, are we getting the right kind of traffic? Are we getting qualified traffic? Are they doing the things we want them to do? Are they meeting the objectives as defined in that initial survey, the questionnaire, the design questionnaire, right? So we keep that in mind as we go through what our customers after with this website, with any digital, ecosystem that we put out there. We'll continue with available. We'll continue to do that behavioral analysis, right? So going back to what Eric was saying, like, did we put the buttons in the right place? Do we have enough buttons? Do we have a clear path? And if for some reason we see there's deviation from a path that we've laid out, like what signs along the highway are we putting up to get somebody back into that funnel? What are we opening up here, right? So there's a lot of opportunity that comes out of this this cycle here, right? Because Eric's got the arrows in his design here. It goes back and forth, right? We start thinking about what makes this website healthier, what's new out there, how can we increase that engagement, and then how do we introduce optimization, right? Because there's never one silver bullet. There's never one final answer to getting that conversion. So we start introducing testing opportunities. We start experimenting on the site. We start, again, going back to how the channels are performing, seeing how we can optimize for those too, right? Like, do we need to do something different for SEO now? Probably, right? So let's figure out what that means. So there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes to keep this website not just healthy but growing, because
Yeah.
there's always going to be somebody else trying to fight for that space, that audience as well. Go ahead, Eric.
I suppose it's fair to say that it's near impossible to hit a home run on the initial website that you design and build, right? It's impossible because the landscape is always changing. Your audiences are always growing, and your demographics are constantly evolving, along with your business goals too, right? So it may be that you go back to your initial healthy website that you built, and then there's a phase 2 to that website where they want to introduce some new ancillary product. Maybe they've just opened a spa, or there's a I don't know, help me out. There's like they want to add in a play park for Kids Kingdom or something
Partnered with
along
a
those
golf
lines.
course.
Sure.
Yeah.
And, as the properties and the businesses are always trying to improve their revenue streams, informs the website, needs to be updated on the website, gets added to the story that they're trying to tell, and doing it in a way where it still feels cohesive, right? That's really important to the brand.
Yeah.
I'm sure everybody has seen a hotel collection or a website where you go from one section to the next and it feels like an entirely different conversation that's happening. It's really important to make that nice transition from one thing into the next and still live under that umbrella of the brand voice and the story. Getting organized in the beginning really helps us get our thoughts together, get your thoughts together, like get the client's thoughts together, so that when things evolve and change, we can roll with those switches in the methodologies and things. Let me.
Well,
I did want
that's
to
an
ask
interesting
you.
point, though, really quick.
Oh, go ahead.
Like, yeah, that you talk about some of those sites where you navigate around and suddenly you feel like you're talking to somebody else. Right. I think that takes the user right out of your brand experience, right? So when we talk about, that content hierarchy and the design methodology at the front, we also want to make sure the right tone is established, and not just established, but through this performance methodology, also consistent, right? And it's no secret that every hotel group will have different lines of business that want digital representation. That's totally fine, right? And I think that that's to be expected. But I think what often gets missed is that how we talk about perhaps, business development on the site might be different than how we talk about, sustainability, right? And it's important to keep that tone somewhat, in that same, ballpark, right? So that you're not taking the user out of the experience. And as your site grows, as your business grows, as we add more stuff to the site, it's also important not to, invent the wheel over and over and just keep reinventing that. So that's why this cycle here is pretty important, right? Because we start to see what works and what doesn't. And then when there's something new to add, we start to see how it fits in nicely or how it can present some elegance in that evolution there. Sorry, go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I was gonna ask you, the importance of sharing your story with these different channels. This is actually a question for you, but I would assume that these things are constantly changing in the order of importance. As new trends come to fruition, you may need to put this thing up at the top, and now this becomes more important. So it's different for every hotelier. No,
That's right.
Some may lean heavily into testimonials because they feel like that's a really good way to connect with their audiences. Travel blogs are always important to destination properties, getting people excited about what they're going to do while they're on the property or around the area. Email campaign blast, all the tricks, and how do in I feel like sometimes, I bet you've seen this too, Rick, where you you see these are all very disparate with some customers that you've worked with in the past, and they all kind of work as sort of independent entities.
Mhm.
Are they working together? Are they supporting each other? Does the social media support the testimonials or the travel blogs, and vice versa? If I'm going through a travel blog, are you also incorporating one of those other channels like testimonials or adventure guides? And all of it works together. It needs to work together to get the best overall healthy experience on your digital platform.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. And there's a lot of risk in not having these things connected, right? If we want to go to analogies, it's like you have your ingredients of communication on your site. You have to weave them into each other. They have to leverage each other's opportunities, or solve for other challenges, right? It's not like if you're baking something, you just throw all the ingredients in at once and then hope it mixes and turns into a cake or something, right? I think here you have to talk about, well, how does my social media strategy support my blogs? Or how do I use testimonials in my email campaigns? How do I connect these dots in my story relevant to my brand, right? There's a lot of nuance in here, but it is very risky to not have these entities, if you will, or different even departments within the organization talking and working together, and especially today and for the next for the foreseeable future with how search is even changing, right? I'm sure there's some SEOs or AIOs on the call who will understand this too, where it's like you're going to need to have these things constantly evolving with your brand. You're going to need fresh content. You're going to need more engaging, digestible content, right? Because AI is coming, right? And I know there's probably going to be some more thought around that, but there are ways to kind of safeguard it, and that's going to be through your content strategy, your design strategy, your optimization strategy. It's paying attention to this stuff is important, and making sure that it all stays connected is part of how you keep your story together.
Yeah, so I guess it's obvious to say there is no silver bullet solution for a digital strategy, right? It's everything working together, all the channels in harmony, which I think makes it really interesting, because it gives everyone a lot more latitude to understand how their performance is affecting the story.
Yeah.
Now you've got, like, I always go back to it, Rick, is like how, these ideas and concepts that the designers can come up with, it's all great. Is it working? We think it will, but can you confirm it's working? And if it's not,
Right.
there's always a way you can tweak it and shave it here and adjust it there. And I love the fact that we're now in a place where we can do this in real time, as kind of getting back to the very beginning of my introduction, and I was talking about the advertising days. That was all supposition. You're like, well, how well is my print campaign doing? Pretty well, maybe. We think. We hope. How well is my radio spot working? I'm paying a lot of money for it. Sure would be nice to know if it's actually working, right? So that's what makes this relationship between our different teams really, really helpful. And you can really go into your next meeting with qualified information, on are you going to re-up your investment for next year? What's the spend going to be for next year? Because, we see how it's performing this year, and it's working. These dollars are count, they count. They're not just being thrown out the window. And that's reassuring in a lot of ways, for anybody, for me too, I like to know that the ideas that we're coming up with do work, do get clicks, do get dwell time, do drive traffic to the next talking point. And as you said before, using heat maps and such, and click-throughs and all of those kind of touch points, it's right there in front of you, and you can kind of look at it holistically and see what's working and what's not working. So I think it's an exciting time to be in the digital space. No,
I think it always has been. I think that's part of it. Why you and I together have done this for as long as we have. I think there's we have fun with it. Like there's always a story or a clue to uncover in the data. There's always some new thing out there that somebody is working on. There's always a challenge. There's always something to solve for. And that's the excitement of, having a digital presence, a digital experience, right? That's the fun in doing this work. And I think we both see that. And I think that's why we love doing this for our customers. You come to us and you say, I've got, a 900-page site and I want to redesign it. Like we roll up our sleeves and like, let's dig into this, right? Let's look at the data. Let's see what's going on. And like, let's get to a point where we are presenting something that best represents your brand and that tells your story and performs. And then let's keep going back to it over and over.
That's the thing too, isn't it? It's the investment, not just up front, but over time, the maintenance of it. I think it's fun to design, of course. It's even better when you know that that entity you've created is growing. I'm going to go back to my baby analogy. Right now, my baby is a teenager. Now my baby is taking their SATs and going to colleges and things like that, and it's growing and it's building, and you can see how this thing really starts to flourish. And great brands are really good at this. This is what they think about. They think they test and question. Is this working? How can it work better? Try it. A/B test, right? Or try tweak it this way, tweak it that way. Work off of the science to improve, to get your site to the next level of engagement with your audience. So I can't imagine doing anything else with my career, especially at this point. I'm getting older. So anyways, let's take that. So the goal there was the healthier website, and we've kind of talked a lot about how our methodology starts to inform the next step of the journey, if you will, and the next step and the next step, and then kind of turning that into this revolving door of that digital space to improve, grow, and whatnot. And I think there's a lot of good information there. And as always, people can follow up with questions, and we're happy to help and answer anything that we can. But I did want to, before we kind of to close things down, I wanted to kind of shift over and offer this up for folks who are interested in a quick read. This article came out, I can zoom in on it a little bit, but Washington Post sent out an article not so long ago, in fact, about how brands are telling their stories, how hoteliers are telling their stories. It's worth the read. I think we can share the link to everybody. It's only 5 minutes or so. But what I really loved about this article, as I kind of went through it, was it confirmed in a lot of ways all the things that we believed in up till now, that each brand has its own story to tell. They need to differentiate. You need to put your flag in the ground and say, this is who we are. We're not like the competitors. We stand for something. And as I said before, when you try to be everything to everyone, you end up being nothing to everyone, right? Because you have no differentiation. You're not thinking about how your customers feel when they're staying on your property. Are they feeling important? Are they feeling relaxed? Are they feeling comfortable? And those things. And there's a number of examples in this article about other brands that have been very successful with this. Kimpton has been around forever. Since I started in the hospitality space, I've always been an admirer of the way that they represented their brand as sort of these really unique boutique city hotels that make you feel like, I just go hang out in that hotel for a week, and just live in the space and feel like I've taken on a different identity for a little while. W Hotels, Ace Hotels, Citizen M, Standard Hotels. I'm going to show you a quick look at their brand, but you can see how these narratives are intertwined into their digital experiences. And, and that kind of goes to this piece about finding your niche. making sure that your personality is different, right? You can't look like your competitor. You got to be different than your competitor if you want people to help people to see you as a standout. What makes the decision to go here versus there? I always say, you know, not to knock Marriott, but with Marriott, you know exactly what you get. It's a lot like McDonald's in that sense. So their brand story is location. I guess if I had to kind of sum it up, would you say that's fair to say?
I think so. I mean, I think there's a lot of ground that has to be covered for them too, right? Just given the size. I think for some of these brands, it will be easier to find your
Mm.
niche, and you know, and it's also okay if it's difficult, right? I think it shouldn't be super easy. There should be some work that has to go into finding that, and you know, that's one way, you know, we can help. Like I think you can look at the data and start seeing like who's coming here, who's making these bookings, right? And you know, I think it's important, right, to have those distinctions in there. But yeah, I agree with that, Eric.
Yeah. So yeah. So at the end of the day, good article to read, and I hope Laura can provide this for you folks, and you can spend a few minutes to look at it. And then that kind of goes to, just to wrap things up a little bit for this, was here's an example of a brand story that we think is a really good example of a brand that is not for everybody. I guess that's one way of putting it. My parents certainly wouldn't want to go to the Standard Hotel. They're not the audience. But what I loved about what they do is they're all in, right? The Standard is the Standard, and they can't be confused with anybody else. And the way they do this, obviously, besides the way they organize their content and their story that they're telling, you know, go to their website, poke around, you'll start to see how they put their digital storyline together, but infusing, I mean, with a heavy dose of visuals, a lot of attitude, and they know their audience, and they are doubling down on that audience. And you know, so kudos to them for having the fortitude and the nerve to say, this is where we are, this is who we are, we're going to stand behind that brand and that story 1,000%, and we're not going to waver from that story, at least for now, you know, the next few years or so. But it's a great example. It's not for everybody, but it's a good example of how bold you can be in some cases. So with that, I don't have anything else to add to it. I don't know, Rick, if you had some thoughts on the brand story of the Standard. I don't think you ever worked with them, did you?
I have not, no. But I'd agree with, you know, some of the boldness. You know, like you've used a term before, planting your flag, right? And knowing your audience, knowing what works, and knowing how to capture that audience. And I agree. I think they do a great job of representing who they are, but more importantly, who their guests are, right? Like what the experience is going to be like. Like I've always said that, you know, when you go to a website, you want to feel like you are not just there, but welcomed there, a part of it, right? So like one of the questions I'd probably leave the audience with is, you know, when you look at your own website, would you want to stay there? Right? And it's a hard question to ask, right? Because I think the gut answer is yes, of course. But then when you start going through it, when you start looking at your own representation online, through a different lens, you probably start to find some holes. You probably start to ask some different questions or wonder why you might be doing something one way or the other. And I think that's where digging into, you know, that tone, the voice, the brand, the visuals, the data, the content, everything starts to make more sense, right? Because as we said before, it's not a one and done, right? And even if you're still optimizing, you still need to pay attention and ask yourself some of those more challenging questions, like, would I stay at this property if, you know, I didn't work here? And I guess that kind of draws us to a bit of conclusion too, right, Eric, where it's, if I had to leave with some pointers, right, for the audience, it'd be this: like, pay attention, look at what things like Google Analytics or Hotjar or Adobe or whatever you use, look at what they're telling you, right? There's an investment there, sure, but look at how your story's performing. It goes beyond conversion rate. I think it goes it goes into into engagement. It goes into some of the other metrics you identified earlier, Eric, like dwell time, exit rates, entry pages. Pay attention to what's in between those lines, because that's when you're going to really start to figure out how to be successful, how to represent your brand the way you need it to be represented, and how to ultimately attract the guests you want to get, right? And also keep in mind that it's never ending, where you're never finished with a hotel website or a brand website, the way you're never finished with the brand.
Yeah, that's a great point. Okay, so I guess that's it for us. And Laura, I don't know if you wanted to.
Yeah, so with 10 minutes left, we have a few questions that came through. And a reminder to everyone, if your question was not read, feel free to email info@sundine.com, and we would be more than happy to answer those questions and send additional resources. So let's see how many we can get through in the next 10 minutes. So this first one brings up everyone's favorite topic, AI. So with recent advancements in AI, specifically with how Google is changing search, how does that affect discovery methodologies when talking about design and data analysis?
I can take that one first, Eric. I think that's always probably going to be the elephant in the room, right? Like, how is AI going to change my business? From an analytics perspective, I think AI, there's a lot of opportunities in there in how we use AI to look for insights that we may not see with the human eye yet. Relative to search, that's still pretty new, right? Like, SEO is going to change probably very dramatically before we know it, right? Knowing what Google is doing with Gemini and AI overviews and all that fun stuff. There's still a lot coming out too, right? It's still kind of early. I'm sure everybody has seen the memes where you search for how many rocks should I eat or something, and it gives you an answer. The answer should be 0, by the way, but it's a changing landscape. And I think the key takeaway there is going to be, kind of what we've been saying, like, focus on your brand. Go back to your story, make sure that, you are doing the right thing by keeping the content updated, the UX engaging, you're following the cookie crumbs in the data, and you're just tending to your garden. It'll grow, right? As any decent gardener will tell you, the more attention you pay to it, the better off it'll do, no matter what the environment throws at it. In this case, AI search. Do we know how it's going to look in a year? No, right? We're not forecasters or mind readers in that sense, as much as anybody wants to be. But I think there's some signals in how it might change, sure. But it's best to pay attention and look at your story.
Yeah, let me add to that, because when I think about AI, it's the shiny object. Oh, what's this new thing? And everybody starts to poke at it, and I think that's a really healthy exercise, as you say, because we're just in the beginning stages of what this is and how we can use it. What we thought 3 months ago, 6 months ago is probably different than how we feel we can use it today. And then in 6 months from now, okay, of course, it's going to evolve. And from a designing standpoint, we're still kind of thinking about what is the best way or the most responsible way, maybe I can put it that way, the most responsible way to incorporate AI into a hotel website, for instance. We've seen examples of this out there that some other websites are doing, and it is not as straightforward as just stick a little button on there and you've got your AI, especially in the hotel space, because we're, I would say historically hoteliers are not really trend setters in terms of the technology space. I don't know if you agree with that or not, but that's kind of how I feel about things. Because we have to be more responsible to the audiences than most other businesses out there. That's the way I'd put it.
I'd agree with that. It's one of those things, embrace it, right? Like it's a change that's coming, sure. And like we're saying, we don't know a lot about it yet. So I think it's worth paying attention to. Again, I'll keep going back to that, but it's worth embracing too. Like it's emerging technology at this point. I mean, it's been around for a little while, but There's a lot of great blogs out there. Like I'll make a plug for Search Engine Land, right? Like they're doing a lot of great work in understanding how artificial intelligence optimization is starting to shape up, and what some of the signals there are, right? So it's one of those things where the map is starting to come together, right? And you're starting to see more and more pieces of it.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so I do have a bit of a follow-up to that. So besides AI, what kinds of challenges have you faced in design methodology, or like have you encountered any roadblocks?
From my end, going all the way back to the beginning, I mentioned there are some assumptions, right? So some of those assumptions are that you have analytics, we have access to it, right? So when we work with our customers, a lot of what we aim for is only achievable if we have the right level of access to things. If purchase events, for example, are configured the right way. I can think of some examples where a purchase event on a site only just tells you that somebody booked a room. Okay, that helps me understand conversion rate. Whereas some is a little more evolved or advanced, where it just doesn't tell me that somebody booked a room. It tells me what room was booked, what rate was booked, how many people, how many nights, how many kids. Say nothing of the dates, right? I think that those are key pieces of the story, right? So oftentimes when we go down this path, we'll make recommendations and we'll come back and say like, hey, we want to be able to do this for you, but we might need to implement this a different way to get a better story out there for you. And sometimes that works, right? So it's your analytics setup will be a challenge, your tag manager setup will be a challenge, but we're willing to work with the customer to make sure that it's getting everybody to the right starting point.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think from our creative side of the house on that topic, some of those design methodologies that can be challenging are, I would say, number one is probably integrations, because in a lot of ways the integrations are beholden to whatever you're being integrated with. And thankfully we've got a great development team. They're very smart folks over there who can help us with those integrations and start to understand what's possible versus what's available. So integrations is always can be a tough nut to crack. And another one that I would throw out there too on that topic is ADA compliance, which is really important to us. As an organization, we believe strongly in ensuring that all of our websites are ADA compliant, WCAG compliant. There's a lot of rules and regulations involved in that. And in a lot of ways, the creative team can run into some frustration there because there are things that we may want to do. We want to push the needle here creatively, do something innovative and animate something here, or drop in this thing there, slide this thing over there, or really kind of come up with a cool technique. But if it doesn't hold up to the standard of what we need to hold to for ADA compliance, we really can't do it. And we have to find another way. It's important. It's a really important topic. And we do this, one, because it's the right thing to do, but two, because we want to make sure that our customers don't get sued. These things come up all the time. Your website is out of ADA compliance, cease and desist, fix it. And no hotelier wants to deal with that email. And then the storm that comes shortly after that.
All right. Well, thank you both. Well, we are out of time, so that wraps up today's discussion on digital storytelling. Thanks again, Rick and Eric, for your expert insights, and thanks to all attendees and registrants for joining us. If you'd like any more information on Sundine's website services, please visit us at sundine.com or contact us at info@sundine.com. So thank you all and have a great rest of your day.